Thanks, Mike. And Frank?
Yeah, basically, I think your user types to me model to a type of application like the target audience. So you have a business application that I work with a lot. Then you have a business-to-business application, which is your occasional user. And then you have a business-to-consumer application, which basically I don't have a lot of experience with. I don't know of many progress companies who do the business-to-consumer part. Now, if you look at the business-to-consumer part, you can also have different target audiences. But in a business-to-consumer environment, you always have to design your application to the lowest common denominator, the most simplistic user. But even in the business-to-consumer environment, the user is getting more sophisticated. So if you look at an email application, which is, you have Gmail, you have Hotmail, it's basically a business-to-consumer application. But it's starting to look like a desktop application. Mm-hmm. Now, if you look at the business-to-business world, which I deal with mostly, besides, like the straight business application, in those environments, it depends. Say if you have a software, a value-added reseller, then usually the decision about what that interface is going to look like is the result of a tug-of-war between sales and development. And it might include dumb things that there is a particular sales point, and he sees himself in the next trade fair being able to use the latest acronyms. Therefore, you have to have this type of interface. And that can lead to dumb decisions, but there is really a place. Certain features, from my experience in applications for VARs, they are completely useless, but they are what sells the application.
Okay, so let's match up the technologies with the types of users. The chart shown here is based on a study done by Forrester that took 3 different types of users and matched them to different UI technologies. The study found that in order for users to be happy with an application, the application needed to use the right technology to meet their needs. Using the wrong technology meant that the application was either not powerful enough or the deployment of the application was too complicated. Mm-hmm. For the infrequent user, a native browser-based solution is probably the best match. That is without politics. As I said earlier, this can be a web speed application using Ajax, or any web-based technology accessing an OpenEdge app server through web services. The occasional user needs a rich user experience and access to the application, probably from their own computer. This is a perfect match for the browser plugin, such as Microsoft Silverlight or Adobe Flex. For this user, the specific browser plugin technology you pick, Microsoft or Adobe, should be based on the skills of your developers and any preferences from your users, or corporate influence. Lastly, we have the power user. This person is not satisfied with the limitations of either type of browser-based solution. They need the power of a desktop. If they need to make the desktop application available over the web, the application can be deployed and managed using Web Client. Another possible technology for this scenario is terminal services, where the complexity of the deployment and update is eliminated while still providing the user a full desktop experience. So we've matched up users and application types, but we still have one open question: how to write your UI code so it does not have to be rewritten when another UI technology comes around. How can you architect your application to support UIs, including ones that you don't even know about yet? And Mike, as you had mentioned, is user interfaces don't last as long as they used to. This slide shows 3 different application types we've been talking about, and each of them fits into the presentation layer of the OpenEdge reference architecture, also known as OERA. Following the OERA is the best way to future-proof your application. Within the presentation layer itself, it is critical to follow a proven design pattern that separates the UI layout, often called the view, from any data and code. This way, when a new user interface technology comes along, you can create a new UI layout or view while reusing your existing event handler code and data access code. A couple of popular patterns today are MVP, Model View Presenter, and MVVM, Model View View Model, which is a new pattern from Microsoft with the introduction of Silverlight. The one common theme among all UI patterns is the separation of the view from the event handling code and data model. Frank, which model do you prefer and why?
Well, first of all, I want to emphasize that the implementation of layering is much more important than which flavor of layering you use. And as I said before, when you introduce a foreign technology, a new technology, you have a different group of developers, and both groups of developers want to dominate the whole platform. So it can be that the foreign technology becomes like a foreign organism that's trying to overtake your application. So what layering really does is it defines the responsibility. And basically what we want is, because Progress is unsurpassed as a vehicle for encapsulating business logic, for developing it fast, flexible, we want Progress to own the server side and basically expel foreign intruders. So in that sense, I have a preference for the Model View Presenter model, because if you compare the two models, basically Model View Presenter is basically you have a view layer on the UI, and that's where the new technology resides. If you have the Model View layer, basically that view layer now has a footprint on the server side and basically arranges the interface by binding. Now, basically it is the technology. There are technologies that simply implement view, and I think that .NET, which you specialize in, Mike, is pretty close to that. It favors binding.
And Mike, your view?
I think we all agree on the role of the OpenEdge reference architecture on the back end, on the layering there, and anything which happens behind the service interface should be kept untouched from intruders, as you said. The question how we design the UI, we've done MVP development. I think the main difference, if you're having a fat Progress client, and the Progress web client in a way is also a relatively fat client, is the question if the presenter code actually is being executed on the client or on an app server. And my favor there is for the Progress clients to execute it on the client. Then it's closer to the actual events that are occurring, reducing any network response time there. Certainly there's a huge challenge with rich .NET interfaces to define which kind of events are handled by the presenters and which are handled by the view itself. There are very, very UI-specific events, and a good example may be drag and drop. If you are using drag and drop as something to link to records on the UI, to basically have a maintenance screen browser with your sales rep, and you want to drag it to a customer record to populate the sales rep there. This typically is a .NET UI functionality which will not be available as drag and drop on most browser-based UIs. So is it a kind of an event which you handle with all the events that happen on the way during a drag and drop operation on the view or on the presenter? I would say it's part of the view. And as soon as it becomes an event relevant for not the business logic because it happens on the app server, but relevant for the client-side logic, it goes as either a callback or a real event to the presenter. What I favor for development there, even with MVP or not with MVP, is to build the UI based on strong components. In the end, we can build most simple screens without writing a single line of code that way. Just configuring how the components work together using the properties of the visual designer. We are tending to build UIs for the GUI for .NET. So the visual designer is our tool to design the screens. And so it's a unique design approach, so the linking of the components, which actually takes a lot of the functionality that a presenter would have, and the link and the configuring of the visual elements.
Can I respond to one thing that you said, that is about the web client being sort of a fat client. Here's something interesting. I've actually seen applications, web client applications that are fantastically thin. Using rendering, where the whole web client implementation was, the progress code was less than 2 megabytes, and it did a whole lot of screens. But there's something interesting that I think that's particular to Progress. If you look at different technologies, Progress has the temp table and the data set, but the temp table, basically, it's just like programming on the database side. It's just like a database table. You don't find that in any other technology. But that, in a way, is a mixed blessing, because a Progress programmer can have a temp table and still do the same thing. So what a tendency is that they tend to do things on the client side. And when I go into an application, I evaluate an application that's going to be ported. What I do is I take the .p's and I take the .w's and I sort them by size. And if I see those .w's being large and those .p being small, then I know there's a lot of work to be done there.
The red lights go off.
But in the majority of the cases, I find that to be the case. People tend to do things on the client side because initially you don't see the difference. And to do things on the server side, to truly implement layering, it's a paradigm shift.
Well, I think with the .NET UI you need a different metric to measure this, because a view class that has no logic but uses a couple of complex individualistic controls, it will easily be much, much larger than the complexest business logic class you're running on the application server, and still the developer may do the layering right. So it's
yes. And that's excellent for your consulting business, because the universal law is that anything that you know how to do is easy. Anything that you don't know how to do is really hard. So I hear you, but to do that without any coding is very hard for somebody who doesn't know how to do it.